And so over here, the next one is pretty long, but I think we have enough time. So we're gonna finish it out here. The daily offerings. The daily offerings have the young bullock and the 2 lambs. And in verse 36, it says, "And thou shalt offer every day a bullock for a sin offering for atonement, and thou shalt cleanse the altar when thou hast made an atonement for it, and thou shalt anoint it and to sanctify it." So there's a bullock, and you're doing that for a sin offering, which we actually went over before, but this is a daily offering. And this again represents the young humanity. And they're supposed to anoint it and clean it afterwards. And then again, there is again the 7-day thing. The 7 days thou shalt make an atonement for the altar and sanctify it. And it shall be an altar most holy. Whatsoever touches the altar shall be holy. So 7 days of atonement for the altar and sanctification of it. And consider most holy. Whenever you see the word most holy or most holy God, that represents Jesus. Why is it most holy? Because it represents Jesus. The 7 days of atonement represents Jesus. This is what happened during the Passover, the 7 days of unleavened bread. And now this is that which thou shalt offer upon the altar 2 lambs of the first year, day by day continually. So every day they're supposed to offer these 2 lambs that are 1 year old. Why is it 1 year old? Isn't that interesting? 1 year old. So 2 lambs, 1 year old daily, offered continually by fire. Now this again, I told you guys that these are my understanding, my personal study, so it doesn't have to be, there's some things that are really like the doctrinal things, like the central message of God, the gospel, that's not open to interpretation, But there are a lot of things in the Bible that, that is open to interpretation. This is why we have many denominations, right? So this is one of those things. I feel like God has revealed this to me personally. You may or may not believe it, but I'm going to share with you why I think this is 1 year old lamb. And I believe it's because Jesus had a 1 year ministry, contrary to what many preachers teach. And typically in the churches, and I believe this for many years as well, until like in the past year and a half, is that typically we believe that Jesus had 3 years of ministry. And we base that on the number of times that Passover is described in the New Testament. And there are 4 occasions where Passovers are mentioned or thought to be representing the Passovers. So if Jesus, who obeyed God's law to the fullest, went to Jerusalem to attend these Passovers, and he went 4 times, then that means it was 3 years, because the final 4th time was when he was on the cross. And so this is a reason why people think he had 3 years of ministry. But if you really examine this, you will find out there's a lot of inconsistencies with that, just like 3 days and 3 nights, of his death and resurrection timing, the Passover timing, and he didn't die on Friday and resurrect on Sunday. But that's what we typically believe, right? So again, this is not a doctrinal issue, so you could believe that if you want, but I'm just telling you my take on why I believe is 1 year old, and it's because of 1 year ministry of Messiah. So why do I believe that? How can you get around this 4 mentions of Passover in the New Testament, and specifically in Book of John. Well, one of the feasts that is described in John chapter 5 verse 1, it doesn't specify that it was the feast of Passover. It's a generic festival that Jesus went to. So that doesn't have to be the Passover. So that's one, first of all. And then in Book of John, chapter 6, verse 4, it says, now the Passover, a Jewish festival, was near. And so it is mentioned there, but that is actually not in the oldest Greek manuscript. That is actually not in the oldest original manuscript. It was actually later added on there, which means the original oldest manuscript didn't have this Passover. And so then we are left with 2 other passages that have the Passover specifically mentioned, which is John chapter 2, verse 33, and in the beginning of his ministry. There's two specific Passovers, which is in the beginning of his ministry after he got baptized. Okay, John chapter 2, verse 33. And then the second one on his death. So if you think about that, there's only 1 year of his ministry. Then, and also if there were really 4 Passovers, then the Bible would have mentioned the other Passovers that he went to too, but they didn't, So that also supports that theory. But there's another reason why I think it was 1 year ministry, because we have a verse in the Bible that says in Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, that Messiah will be cut off at 62nd week of his ministry. So if you look at that, you're like, really? Wow. Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, you will see that it specifically says that after 62nd week, Messiah will be cut off. And so it's a little over a year, actually. And if you add his death from the time that he was on the cross to the Pentecost, that comes out exactly to 70 weeks. 70 weeks. Jesus completed his mission in 70 weeks, just like the prophecies in the Old Testament. And so it is, to me, it's pretty convincing to me, and so this is the reason why I think there was 1 year old lamb that was sacrificed, because this represented the Messiah to the T, So let's go on. So that was that. Verse 39, it says, the one lamb thou shalt offer in the morning, and the other lamb thou shalt offer at even or evening. Verse 40, and with the one lamb, 1/10 deal of flour mingle with the 4th part of a hin of beaten oil, and the 4th part of a hin of wine for a drink offering. That's really interesting, isn't it? I thought, wow, that's really specific. Why is this lamb being offered with the 10th of the flour and the 4th of the beaten oil and the 4th of a wine? So by the way, the hin is like a measurement of the liquid. So okay, the 10th and the 4th and the 4th for a drink offering. So I was thinking there must be some meaning to this, right? You know me with the numbers. So I thought about it, and God gave me this revelations. Again, it's it's one way to interpret this. There may be other interpretations, but I'm just sharing with you what I was given. And so the 10th flower, what is the most common number in the Bible that represents the 10th? The 10th represents the tithing, right? Tithing. And the number 10, we typically look at it as perfect number, right? 10 out of 10, it's a perfect number, right? And also that tithing represents the first fruits, right? Because you're supposed to give the first tenth of your earnings or the harvest, which represents the first fruit, which also represents Jesus because the Bible says Jesus is our first fruit, right? So that kind of takes care of that symbolism because it represents Jesus. Remember, the Old Testament, if you get confused about whatever is in the Old Testament, when you think about Jesus, the answer will come out. So that there it is. If you think about Jesus, that 10th thing gets solved, that mystery gets solved. What about the fourth beaten oil? Remember, I told you before that in Hebrew, the numbering system, Hebrew numbering system, 4 could mean 14, 40, 400, 4,000, right? So if you make that 4 into 40, then it makes sense. Because what happened with Jesus? Because he was tempted in the desert for 40 days. It was 40 days of Lent before he went to the cross. And after the resurrection, he stayed on earth for 40 days teaching his disciples even. So that fourth beaten oil represents what Jesus did. And in fact, all the other 40s in the Old Testament, it stems from what Jesus did in those 40 days, the 40 days, like 40 days and nights of raining in Noah's flood to 40 years of Moses in the desert. All of that represents what Jesus did in 40 days in the desert, 40 days of Lent, and 40 days of his teaching after his resurrection. So that's what, and why the beaten oil? Well, because Jesus was beaten to death, before he got on the cross. And so, and that oil, of course, represents the holiness, the purity, sacredness, and ultimately the Holy Spirit, And also, I remember I said 44 also could represent 400, right? Well, what does 400 mean? Because Israelites were in slavery for 400 years in Egypt, and that represents our slavery of sin, okay? And so ultimately, he freed us from that bondage of sin. So this is all encapsulated in this fourth hin of the beaten oil. What about the fourth hin of the wine for the drink offering, right? So the flour and the beaten oil, they're mixed together. This is called the meat offering, and the wine, it represents the drink offering. The meat offering, you would think, wait a minute, there's no meat in the flour and the oil. Why is it a meat? Because I believe that God made it this way on purpose as a meat offering, even though there was no meat, because the poor folks supposed to bring the grain. So this represented the flour, the grain, the wheat, and only the poor folks come to offer that as peace offering. The rich folks bring their animals. And so it was God's way, I believe, of making the poor folks offering just as important by calling it a meat offering, labeling the poor folks version of the offering as meat, even though it wasn't, because he put an emphasis and importance of no matter what kind of offering you bring, I still consider it as meat. I still consider it as the body that Jesus, the sacrifice of the Messiah. And I believe that's why. But what about the drink offering, the fourth hin of wine? So drink offering is kind of obvious to us because the wine represents blood of Christ, right? This is what we do during the communion. It represents his cross. He said that at the Last Supper, and Apostle Paul talks about it when he talks about the communion. So what about the blood on the cross? Well, that's it. It's so obvious, right? But I also want to point out that remember I said 4 could represent 40, 400, and even 4,000. I believe this one, it points to the 4,000 year of human history before Jesus bled on the cross. It took 4,000 years for humans to put Jesus on the cross, and he finally bled on the cross. He got killed on the cross at the 4,000th year of human history. So I believe that's what it was. So you see how you can interpret, you can get all these little things that are hidden in the Old Testament come to life when you think about the Messiah, about Jesus, what his life. It completely identically reflects his life. And so let's get on to the evening lamb. The evening lamb, it says here, and the other lamb thou shalt offer at even or evening, and shall do thereto according to the meat offering. Again, the meat offering is not really meat, but the grain offering of the morning. So you're supposed to do it the same way, offer the lamb and the grain offering, and according to the drink offering thereof, for a sweet savor, an offering made by fire unto the Lord. So it's exactly the same. The lamb number 2 in the evening is exactly to be sacrificed the same way, mixed in with the flour and the wine and the oil, but God labels it, especially this one, as the sweet savor. And I believe this is because, as I mentioned in previous sessions, that sweet savor refers to the Jews. Why do I think that? Because the first time God mentions that in the Bible as sweet savor was the offering that Noah offered after Noah's flood, when God promises the rainbow covenant. And he calls that offering sweet savor. And that's where the nation Israel started, really. And then it was carried on. And then Jacob's story, again, Isaac calls Jacob's offering to him, the meat, the soup, that his mom actually cooked. He calls it a savory meat, you know. And again, who is Jacob? Jacob is Israel. And so this is the reason why I believe that God calls it a sweet savor, because it represents Israel. But why the evening? Why not morning? Why the evening didn't they come first? You know, I believe it's because evening is because the nation Israel has rejected the Messiah, and they will accept Jesus as their Messiah during the tribulation. And so this is why they're late. They're late to the game. You know, they're gonna accept him in the evening during the tribulation at the end, whereas the Gentiles will accept him in the morning, in the beginning. But however, there's also a symbolic meaning behind this, also in that in Jewish or Hebrew culture, evening, their day actually starts in the evening, so they're not really late. They're on time. So it's kind of like there's a duality, the dichotomy behind this. Like it means both. They're not really late, you know, because they're on time according to God's timetable. So, anyways, and then in verse 42 it says, "This shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the door." There it is again, at the door. Jesus is the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, where I will meet you to speak there unto you. He's going to meet you right at the door as you enter. "And there I will meet with the children of Israel, and the tabernacle shall be sanctified by my glory." You see, sanctification, you know, they try to do this with the blood of the animals and stuff, you know, and it's a symbolism, but that actually doesn't sanctify. It's actually his glory. It's actually God's presence. God himself is the only one that can sanctify us. So all this blood and all this, these are all substitutes for the real thing. So all these rituals were substitutes of the real thing that the Messiah did. And I will sanctify the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar. I will sanctify also both Aaron and his sons to minister to me in the priest's office. And I will dwell among the children of Israel and will be their God. And they shall know that I am the Lord their God that brought them forth out of the land of Egypt, that I may dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. And they were supposed to do this as a continual burnt offering. And then God's going to meet them. He will dwell among them, be their God. This is what Jesus did. He freed us from the bondage of Egypt and our sin. And he says at the end, I am the Lord their God. I am. That is the name of God, Jehovah. And I am Jesus. He said himself that he is. I am that I am. Jehovah, Yeshua, is I am. And by him, we can only be saved and be sanctified and enter into his presence. I have another slide, but you know what? I'm going to save this for another time because I ran out of time, but I will save that for another time. But anyways, I'm going to stop sharing here. And